Welcome to the FirstNet Town Hall. The Town Hall today is going to be a focus on state agencies, state departments. We've been having several town halls, and we realized we needed to bring in all of our state partners as well. So as we get started, my name is Karen Wong. I'm the Assistant Director for Public Safety Communications. I'm also the state point of contact for FirstNet. So all information flows through me to FirstNet and back out to everyone. And I don't do this alone. I have a lot of staff that help. And then we also have our California First Responder Network Board of Directors that also carry the message for us. So we have a very large group that help us through getting the FirstNet information out. So before we get started, how many of you have heard about FirstNet? Yay, this is awesome. I'm glad to see so many people have heard about it. I'm going to go over a PowerPoint and kind of get everybody up on the same page. And then we'll start with our panel members and a briefing from FirstNet and then a perspective on where we're at with California. But first I'd like to start with a video that we put together.
There's great capability in making this all come together. Situational awareness, sharing critical data resource management, being able to share real-time information for your law enforcement organizations.
Throughout the history of our reservation, we've dealt with a variety of natural disasters. And what we've noticed in the last 3 federally declared disasters is that we've had challenges being able to get through using our cell phones because everybody's using their cell phones and there's not a dedicated network for our first responders and public safety personnel to be able to utilize.
For day-to-day purposes, commercial carrier does a pretty darn good job. However, when you get into a large event type situation, that's when it becomes it degrades, if you will.
We're able to download pictures and information, but we can't get that information out to the deputy. So what you'll see is dispatchers taking their own personal cell phone, taking a picture of the screen or emailing the picture to their screen, then texting it to the deputy in the field.
I think that there's been a number of times, not the least of which was 9/11, where there are studies have come about that have said that the number one problem in this disaster in terms of response was the lack of ability to communicate with one another, and that holds true to this very day.
We have no cell data service in our community in 90% of my fire district, so just establishing that would be a huge step forward for firefighters and the general public.
In 2003, we had a very large fire, the Cedar Fire, which burned nearly 300,000 acres of almost 3,000 homes lost. That fire ended up burning right up to the boundaries of the reservation. We had a lot of issues with miscommunication with different agencies, with a major interstate being shut down, those folks being diverted, both eastbound and westbound traffic off that major interstate onto a 2-lane road, which ended up coming right into our evacuation route for the reservation. So while we're trying to evacuate thousands of people out of a casino, several hundred people off the reservation, the Sheriff's Department is trying to evacuate local surrounding community. We're dealing with literally hundreds and hundreds of cars being routed off this interstate right into our evacuation route. At the time, we had no interoperable communications.
We have very mountainous terrain, which causes a lot of challenges when you're dealing with line of sight, and having a network that has not only fixed assets but also deployables during different types of situations would allow our responders to do their jobs and do it safely.
We're looking for essentially better service, better coverage, better capacity with our data networks today. We don't have a whole lot of that today. We get into some of these large events and all of a sudden our capacity is reduced because the pipe is completely full. So by getting to a dedicated network that is high speed, we hope to eliminate those types of situations.
Anytime we can enhance our communication system or add redundancy, add equipment, the possibilities are always going to increase the efficiency of what we're doing as far as our response.
FirstNet can provide the ability to send voice, data, and images over a dedicated, secure network.
FirstNet would bring a comfort level for my entire community for safety.
Having a dedicated public safety broadband network where we can send voice communications, pictures, and videos from an agent on the ground to the helicopter that can see where he needs him to go would create a much more effective response to cross-border incidents and support to other agencies in the event of emergency or crisis.
FirstNet means an opportunity for public safety in general and for the fire service in particular to take advantage of broadband technology that's been out there in the marketplace and is available to the public, but it's never been available to public safety in a way that is hardened, that is protected, and that allows us to apply technology to our particular industry or our particular profession.
We'll know where to go, what to do, what the resources are that are available, and that information can be real time and it can change.
What FirstNet will give us the opportunity is to share that digital information not only to the deputies but to other agencies within our county.
A dedicated network, when I hear that word, it essentially means to me that it is something that is meant for us. It's privatized, it's dedicated just for us. We're not sharing it with the public. That's important, it's huge because of the ramifications of sharing a network with the public.
It allows for the sharing of a whole new set of information. And most importantly, it allows for communication and collaboration across jurisdictional boundaries. That'll go a long way towards helping us be in a position to respond quickly, more comprehensively, and share a lot of information when an event happens.
A dedicated public safety network to me means security for the entire nation and safety for California.
Having the information that you can actually send data on a dedicated network is going to be huge for all of our public safety partners. Okay, so I am going to now do my slide deck, Paul. There we go. Thank you. So we put together a document that's FirstNet by the numbers, and you probably saw it when you were walking in. And for California, well, first, do I have to do this? Oops. Okay, there we go. FirstNet was signed into law back in February of 2012. And we've been working with FirstNet on outreach since then. Actually, we got started probably summer of 2012. And when you look at the state of California and you look at how many public safety agencies we have to hit, we still have so much talking to do and so much more outreach to do. But what we realized is we had not talked to our state agencies. And for FirstNet, when you look at our state agencies, everybody spans the entire state. And so we wanted to bring this together to have you start looking at what we're doing with FirstNet and to get involved and to help us chart our path and make sure that we're getting the coverage that we need to serve all of our public safety agencies within the state, but also our local agencies as well. So there was $7 billion put behind FirstNet. Anybody that knows infrastructure, we could spend $7 billion in California to put this network up. So we know it's not enough for the nation, but it is actually seed money to put this network together. And the fact that when this act was signed into law, that they included money, meant that they're really serious about doing this. And public safety had been asking for this D Block spectrum for years. And so this was a huge path in the right direction, not only to have this law signed, but the $7 billion that went along with it. So when we start looking at who will use FirstNet, we're still kind of deciding all of that. And when you try to define public safety, there's so many different definitions. It's not just our law enforcement and our fire and our EMS. Emergency services needs to be able to have access to this network. When you are working with Caltrans, you know that you need Caltrans to be able to go off and do what you need to do when you're responding. So there's so many different aspects to who a first responder might be. Utilities, again, we need them. At the recent fires that we had, without PG&E and being able to respond like they did, we would not have been able to get services back up in that area quickly like that happened. So our first responder network is going to, we're really going to have to decide who that is in California, and that's going to be one of the challenges as we proceed through the year. And then when you look at the coverage challenges in California, we have 2,100 public safety agencies, 476 incorporated cities, 58 counties, 11 ports, 3,400 special districts, 450 public safety answering points, PSAPs, and we have 109 federally recognized tribes. Tribes were also included in this act when it was signed into law, that they need to be served with FirstNet as well as everyone else. So we've worked very hard to make sure that our tribes are included and that they will end up with the same network that everyone else in public safety will be getting. So the network, there's a little bit of a diagram of what we perceive it might look like. We really don't know what the network will look like right now. FirstNet is going through an RFP process, which you'll hear a little bit more about later on. And once the bids are back and an award is made, we'll have much more information about what the network will look like and how it will span through the nation. How much it will cost? We don't know. A lot, a very lot. And then what is our road to FirstNet? By 2022, FirstNet will be established. We will have use of the network. How widespread, again, we'll go back and we'll be hearing from FirstNet later on. A lot of that also has to do with the response to the RFP and once that bid is awarded. So when building out a national network that has never been done before like this, FirstNet has to overcome a lot of challenges. There's a lot of unknown costs. Cybersecurity is going to be a real problem to make sure that we have a secure network. Infrastructure availability, anybody in California, we know, and we have best practices through LA RICS and when we were working on Bay RICS to know that our infrastructure in California is really lacking. Interoperability, we still continue today are challenged with interoperability with our radio networks. When you bring that data component to it, interoperability is going to be extremely important. Next Gen 911, next generation of 911 will be a IP backbone to all of our public safety answering points, the PSAPs. That will all have to be integrated into the FirstNet network in some fashion. Because when you step back and look at how does this information, say the Boston bomber, for instance, that information of the picture came from the public. And so that information has to have a place to go on, to be triaged, to look at, to find out what information needs to be pushed back out to our public safety agencies. We don't even know what the PSAPs of the future will look like. What FirstNet does is really change the dynamics of how we provide information to our first responders from here on out. Rural and tribal coverage is a huge issue for California. When you take a look at rural in California, we have 5% of urban, and then 81% of rural, and then 14% is what we consider wilderness. So while we're a very populated state, we have a lot of rural areas that need coverage based on the events that we've been having. And then technical support. We all struggle with that every day. That will be something that FirstNet will also be struggling with because making sure there's enough technical support out at a nationwide network. Look at what Verizon and AT&T have done. So this is a massive undertaking. So as we've been walking through this and doing outreach, similar to what we're doing today, we've held 7 town hall meetings, and each one has gotten larger and more interactive, and I forgot to say it when I started this. If anybody has questions of me during my presentation, of the presentations that will be after me, I want this to be interactive as possible. So if you have questions, raise your hands. We'll get a microphone to you, and we'll take the time. These things work a lot better when they're interactive and they're a conversation. So I meant to say that in the beginning, sorry. But we've had our 7 town halls. We put a focus on our town halls after the first overview of FirstNet. We had a focus of fire, EMS, law enforcement, our 911 community, rural California, and then our federal partners. This will be our 8th, dealing with getting the information out to all of our state agencies. We've had 2 Department of Homeland Security Office of Emergency Communications workshops. We had one in Sacramento back in August of 2014, and then one at Diamond Bar, October of 2014. The Office of Emergency Communications is a wealth of information and have been a great support to us and each of the states as well as FirstNet. Then we held our FirstNet initial consultation meeting in July of, I'm not very good at this, sorry. July of 2015, we had over 200 participants. Normally when you have a state consultation, the first day, very robust, lots of interaction. Second day, a little dwindles a bit. We had folks stay the entire time. It was probably one of the best meetings I have ever been to. And it wasn't so much what my office did, it was what the participants did. Everybody was very participatory. Everyone had so much to offer. It allowed FirstNet to walk away with a very good perception of what California's needs are. And it probably gave them, I'm looking over, I don't think you were there, Brian, right? No? Keone was there. And you nod, yes. That it really gave FirstNet the information that they needed, because they have to gather information from every state in order to have a good reflection of what the nation needs as they're putting this RFP together. We then had to do data collection to give FirstNet the information again to put in this RFP. Public safety is not really good at responding to surveys. When we first started this, we did a survey just to get people to understand what FirstNet was and to get some feedback before we started our outreach process, and we had less than 3% respond. When we did the survey for data collection, we had 14% respond. Okay, didn't meet my mark, but I want to express that that 14% for California was very big, and it was very rich in data. So what we were able to do was to take that data, take the information from the Office of Emergency Communication that they had been collecting over the years for the state of California, take the information that we knew how public safety works based on all of our public safety partners, and we were able to extrapolate the needs of California to present to FirstNet through the data collection what California needs as far as this network. If any of you have not seen the survey, have not responded to the survey, it's still not too late. We want to continue collecting this data and providing it to FirstNet. The better data that we can get from all of you either supports the data that we extrapolated, or it provides new and better data. So if you haven't done it, if you need a copy of the survey, Romino in the back, she's raising her hand, and she'll be able to email it to you. We want as many responses as we can possibly get. So I'm going to go over a really, really high level of what the consultation and the state plan process looks like, and you will get much more information as we go through the day. The RFP process, the RFI process, RFP development, and then RFP results. Everybody in the state understand that process. It's a very tedious, lengthy process. The better data that goes into the process, the better data that comes out. At the state level, and this is at the FirstNet level, at the state level, we will start doing more workshops, getting more focused data. This will probably be our last town hall for quite a while, unless there's another group that we need to provide additional outreach. But we'll be focusing on workshops to provide better, more detailed data to FirstNet. Again, the better data we give FirstNet, the better the network is going to be to serve California. We will have more consultation engagements. I don't know that it will be another 200 attendee type meeting. We might look at smaller focus groups on wherever there might be some deficiencies in our data, that we will work with FirstNet to make sure that we are, again, getting FirstNet the data that they need. Then once the RFP is awarded, there's time for FirstNet to put all their needs together. We will end up with a draft state plan. So the draft state plan goes to the governor. In the law, the governor was designated at each state to be the ultimate decision maker for FirstNet. So for FirstNet in California, it will be Governor Brown. The governor has an option to opt in or opt out of the network. Opting out, what that means is we still get a network in California. It will just be operated by California. So it won't be operated by FirstNet. That goes into, we would manage, the network as we would manage, as Verizon or AT&T would manage a network. It's a very big undertaking, but we do have that choice. And so we will be looking at what would be the best thing for California to do. We will be working closely with FirstNet as we're deciding what we need to do, and we will be working very closely with FirstNet on the draft state plan. Again, this is to provide public safety, the best network that we can get to, I know I'm a mess, huh? Sorry. The best network that we can get to serve our public safety agencies. Once we have reviewed the state plan, it will then go to the governor for a decision. If we choose to opt out, we will have 90 days to provide our opt-out plan to FirstNet. It'll have to be approved by FirstNet and the FCC. NTIA and FCC. So it's a huge undertaking, but again, if it's the best thing for California, we will absolutely be looking at it. And again, we will be working with FirstNet throughout the process. Stakeholder activities will continue, outreach, review, and data collection. We will never stop data collection. Even when the network is up and operating, we should continue with the data collection because demographics are constantly changing in California, and so we want to make sure that this network is always dynamic. So, yeah?
In the event that we opt out, does the state have to come up with the funds to build the network?
Yes. There might be possibility, I will have to defer to FirstNet if this is true or not, for some grants, but there is no guarantee that there will be any funding for the network. Right. True? So as we move forward, what will we be tracking? We'll be tracking California's coverage objectives. So I want to show you what we've put together. Could we put the cover objective map up? So FirstNet gave us an objective map that they, based on the information that they had, that they saw would provide California what we need. So when we look at the map, the areas in the brownish color was FirstNet's baseline. We took all the 911 calls for 2014, so that would have been all the responses. This is the actual call location, the caller's location is all in the blue. So when we overlay that from the FirstNet first brush of what we needed, it expanded out. And then we've added all of our tribal lands that were not covered in these areas. We're getting additional information from CAL FIRE to make sure that we're serving their offices as well. When we first, this is kind of funny, when we first presented our coverage objective map to FirstNet, the entire California was covered. And Brian called and said, "Are you guys sure about this?" And we know that we cannot have the state covered all at once. I don't even know that it's reasonable to have the entire state covered at any point in time. There will be deployables, there will be other ways that we can get the network, but when you look at the topology and the geography of California, in our very rural areas, it's going to be very difficult to have a hardened network available at any time, and that's just a reality. But we do need to make sure that we have coverage where we need it for responses. And so we thought by taking the 911 calls, that would include any large activities that we had throughout the year. So the Rose Bowl would have been one of those large activities. Any 911 calls would have been covered in our 2014 data. We will then take also the 2015 data for 911 calls and map it again to see if there's been any changes. We have over 28 million 911 calls every year, and 76% of those are wireless. So the data that we used for this is, I felt it was very reliable as a start for FirstNet. Looking at this coverage map, this is not the coverage necessarily that California is going to get as they roll FirstNet out. This is our coverage objective map. We will have more information once the RFP is awarded and we start working closely with FirstNet on our state consultation plan. Rural coverage is one of our main concerns and has been one of our main concerns as we've been looking at FirstNet. And if you look at Northern California, you can see an awful lot of white. We have smaller populations in that area. We also have fire threats and the Cascadian subduction zone. So we have threats in that area that we want to make sure that we at least have coverage somehow, even if it is a deployable. And then if you look at our eastern part of California, what I'm hoping is that when FirstNet meets with the federal partners and the DoD, I think a lot of that white in the middle will be covered by the military, because that's much of our military lands. And we've also been working closely with Joe Wessel, who is the DoD point of contact for FirstNet, to make sure that we've been coordinating with him and his group and what the coverage objectives can be for California. We're also, we received in September FirstNet's definition of rural. And so we're taking that definition, which is basically rural areas as any city, town, or incorporated area that has a population of less than 20,000 inhabitants and is not adjacent to any contiguous to an urbanized area that has a population greater than 50,000. We don't know exactly what that means to California. So we're doing an analysis. I'm hoping that once the analysis is done, that we won't have any rural concerns other than the topology and geography of California, which will always be our challenge, and it won't be population-based. We're also working closely with our tribal. We have a tribal working group, and they are very active in California and making sure that the tribal coverage is there. And one of the very good things that for California and our tribal community is two of our huge advocates for FirstNet for tribal have also been hired by FirstNet to represent the tribal on a nationwide. So I feel very good with the advocacy that the tribals will have as we move forward. So you're going to hear much more detail today on FirstNet. That's kind of my overview. Does anybody have any questions before we move on?
Hi, Randy Wagner. Maybe I was asleep, but the blue, what is the blue on this chart?
The blue is the mapping of all of our 911 calls in California.
Oh, I thought the gray, I thought the FirstNet baseline was mapping of all those calls.
No, that was ours. The FirstNet mapping was based on the information that FirstNet had. At that time, they didn't have our 911 overlay, so that's what we added to this.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you very much.
And it just expanded what FirstNet had, but clearly we were thinking the same thing with coverage.
Got it. Thank you.
Regarding that large area in Inyo County, which is where I'm from, you're saying DoD is going to come in and possibly cover that for coverage?
No, no, that's not what I meant. We didn't have much data for that area. When you look at that, there's very little 911 activity, but most of that is federal land. And so what we're hoping is that we will get more information from the federal partners, the DoD, and what the coverage should be. But that does not mean that they'll cover it, because they're working with FirstNet just like every other state is. That will just be one more data bit that FirstNet will have for coverage in California.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'm going to now introduce Make sure I'm on the right thing here. Keone Cowley, he is our FirstNet Region 9 consultation and outreach lead.
Thank you, Karen. I am Keone Cowley. I am the Region 9 consultation and outreach lead for FirstNet. So I represent all of what is traditionally FEMA Region 9, Arizona, Nevada, California, Hawaii, American Samoa, Guam, and CNMI, Saipan, which is the city there. So in Region 9, we have done all of our initial consultations with all of the stakeholders and interested parties during the course of this year. And next year, we are looking to be more active in consultation with all of you. One of the things in the packets that you have before you that Karen said some of the follow-up items are these things called consultation task teams, which are CTTs. That's where FirstNet reaches out to all of the stakeholders to understand more of the requirements, the operating capability, what are the gaps between, an agency's adoption of the FirstNet service or product, how to use data, how do we determine priority and preemption on the network, things like that. Very technical discussions that are really agency specific. We want to get into that kind of granularity and detail now in advance of the initial operating capability of the network, which is about 2.5 years from now. So we'll be having a lot of those sessions starting in January and going through the course of the entire year. So as the sort of point of contact for FirstNet in this region, if any of you have questions or concerns, technical or otherwise, about what's going on, you can reach out to me. My email will be provided, I think, at the end, if it's not already in the packet on the bios. One of the things we're focused on right now and a hard push this month is on the acquisition. So it's essentially a $6.5 billion acquisition that will be posted on the Federal Business Opportunities website, FedBizOps, by the end of the month. And what it is to acquire a public-private partnership, not just services, but an actual public-private partnership that is forged with an existing, provider or incumbent or an implementation party that can bring all the pieces together and all the infrastructure together to combine it with the synergies that they have already developed in their coverage, and then deliver that service, pass it through to the states and in our state plan. So it's a big deal, and it's a very lengthy process. Karen talked about the map, how we came to this, and there was a lot of baseline data layers that built this map before it was ever presented to California, and then California modified it, and we've adjusted it considerably for this time frame. But this is the objectives that we want to cover, and it's based a lot upon where people are, not necessarily like the high fire severity areas and things like that, but where are the calls for service, where does public safety operate on a daily basis majority of the time? Because we have to prioritize where the coverage actually is, and there are economies of scale and there are economic realities on how we can deploy this in phases. So that's been taken into consideration, and California's done a fantastic job of prioritizing that. It doesn't mean that other areas that are shown in white will not be developed over time. It just means that in the first initial operating capabilities in the first 5 phases of build out, they're not the top priority at this moment in time. So the other key distinction in the network is it is a data network. Like, we are very interested at this point in how you use data. What information are you exchanging to your mobile units, to personnel in the field? How do you use data in your SOPs? How do you exchange information, and what are the protocols involved in doing that? I mean, if you're running wants and warrants out of a police car, you're checking fire infrared data for hot spots or whatever it is. How do you use it now? What applications do you use now? And will it be compatible with the standards and capabilities of the FirstNet network when it is deployed? So those are the types of things we're getting into now. Also, what constitutes in your agency the definition of what a public safety entity is? Someone who is qualified and sort of validated and authorized to be on this network. This is not just an open network for the public to use. This is dedicated to public safety, and everybody that qualifies under the definition of a public safety entity will have access, but it will be authorized and authenticated access to the network so that people can interoperate. That's a fundamental distinction and change in the way that people think in terms of interoperability. When everyone that is on this network will be interoperable to some degree, and the protocols for the data exchange and information exchange will all be baked in to the standards and the cybersecurity and everything on the network. So that's why we need to get this detailed information in this course of 2016 to get it into the state plan that's presented to the governor, so the governor can have a really good feel about whether he should decide to opt in or opt out. Now, opting in, as Karen said, is the easiest way to go. It's a 90-day decision. The clock starts at 90 days once a governor receives the plan. We assume the governor will talk to all of the cabinet members and all the other agencies that have an interest in the network before making the opt-in decision. If the governor decides to opt in for California, FirstNet will build the network and will incur 100% of the cost for building that network in California, including maintenance and operations thereafter. If California decides to opt out, California has actually 180 days to come up with a plan that mirrors FirstNet's plan, that is compatible with FirstNet's plan, apply for the license to the spectrum with the NTIA and the FCC to approve their plan, and then start building the network with funds as yet to be determined. So it is much harder to opt out than it is to opt in. Just giving you kind of that lay of the land, so when you're thinking about it, it's not an easy decision to make. It is a significant financial, sort of potential unfunded liability for the state if the state decides to go that route. If the governor doesn't make a decision and doesn't do anything, it's similar to some of the legal structure in legislation. It'll be opt-in automatically after 90 days if the governor doesn't do anything. So that's kind of the framework that we have to work within. The law is very specific in terms of what FirstNet has to do. FirstNet must provide consultation to the states and the tribes through the state. The FirstNet must perform outreach, which we are doing, and these town hall settings are a perfect example of that. We realize, though, that in California, it's so vast, we're not going to be able to reach everyone. So we're going to try to put a program in place that empowers all of you to communicate downrange with all of your constituents and other agencies with material like Karen had had the FirstNet by the numbers, other information, fact sheets, marketing collateral that you can use in your agencies to sort of spur the idea and the adoption so the conversation continues outward. We're trying to reach, millions of people in California, and it's difficult to do with, small teams. And like I said, I'm the only Region 9 person for the entire region. Brian Hobson, who works with me, is on our state planning team and is dealing with the data, building the state plan, the draft, and giving it to the governor. Outside of that, we have some experts in certain verticals like EMS, 911, police, law enforcement, fire, some other activities. And we have an entire technology shop in Colorado that is focused on the actual nuts and bolts of the LTE systems, the technology, the backhaul, and all of those other kinds of cybersecurity things. But we are few, and the number of subscribers that would adopt the service are vast and immense. I mean, it could be upwards of 20 million people in California alone, probably just in the Southern California. It's probably 20 million people. So the challenge is how do we get that message out? How do we keep people really informed leading up to the governor's decision so that they can weigh in with the governor if he asks, or talk to other people that have a stake in the system to really make it work. This is first and foremost, it is a data network. It is an LTE-based, wireless data network. Voice is a secondary component to it, but data is the first component. So all the traditional LMR systems that are out there, radio, trunk systems, other microwave, however you communicate now, will continue to need to be in place in parallel while FirstNet is being built for the data piece. So that's important to know. So don't let your budgets go anywhere or be deferred for any radio maintenance that you may have or tower maintenance. It's very important to keep that in place while FirstNet is coming up. Okay. So with that, I'll take any questions that you might have about anything at all related to the acquisition or technical nature of the FirstNet. And Brian and I are here to answer questions that you might have.
Keone, I've got a question for you. The definition of public safety, it sounds like it's a little fuzzy. Who makes that call?
The attorneys at FirstNet have come out with a final sort of opinion on that definition. It was posted on the Federal Register. It is pretty broadly defined, but a public safety entity is, if I can paraphrase it, is sort of every traditional public safety element, which would be police, fire, EMS, right? And then the secondary users are anybody that provides a public safety service. So it can be urgent care centers. It can be a bunch of campus police, campus security.
Private security.
Only if they're serving the public in public safety element. Yeah, at this point. Also includes, I should bring up Transportation Authority, Public Works people that are dealing with critical infrastructure, utilities, major utilities, the water, electric, sewer, if that matters.
So a PG&E and a SMUD?
Yeah.
Yeah.
PGE, Edison, yeah, that whole group, which is, I mean, that covers quite a big area. I mean, that's all of California if you just do Edison and PGE service territory. So, any other questions? Okay, so one of the other strategies involved in deploying the network, you're going to see it come out in phases in terms of what we think the initial operating capability will be up until it gets to its full operating capability. So it's a 5-year implementation plan to distribute it nationwide, and that includes its U.S. territories as well as every state in the union. Even if a state is not participating now, which we have one that's kind of on the verge of not totally in the game, we still have to bring the network there. The defining element of FirstNet's network is that we have to go where public safety needs us to go. It is not driven by market demand. It is not driven by profitability of where it makes the most sense. Like a commercial provider is constrained by where they invest to where they can get subscribers. We have to actually go where public safety lives and operates and breathes. And that's one of the biggest differences. So therefore, we have to prioritize in those phases where we go, how we get into that. So for CAL FIRE, I know that they've had a concern with the data about the high fire severity areas. And we can show coverage obviously up to the perimeter of a lot of those areas or the BLM areas or other federal lands. But it's going to be phased in terms of our capabilities. In the rural areas, it's really about the coverage, because the capacity on that coverage might be low because there's not a lot of users out there and it's only used certain parts of the time. In the metro areas, it'll be a high concentration and density of users and they'll have a high capacity and coverage is less of a concern. So we're trying to balance both of those things in the economies of scale as we deploy, as we plan the phase development. But a lot of it will depend on our partnership with the winning offerer and what they're able to do, what they're able to leverage. They may have coverage in a lot of different areas. They may have agreements with rural telecoms and tribal telecoms to provide coverage in those other areas. And they may also call all of you to access your infrastructure, whether it's a city, a county or state infrastructure. Caltrans has infrastructure and people have towers and spaces. So we're waiting on the providers to and the bidders to come up with that strategy on how they're going to interact with all of you to make sure that they can provide that coverage footprint that they're going to guarantee through the acquisition. Any questions on that? One of the slides that Karen has yes, Ferdinand.
Just to clarify, because on the last, that was at the environmental impact statement meeting, FirstNet was going to apply for the permits, but yet your vendors are the one that's going to decide what sites to build. So I was a little confused by that. That's why I asked that question during the webinar. If FirstNet is submitting the permits for environmental, CEQA, NEPA, but yet FirstNet's not building anything, you're relying on your vendors. How does that work? I was a little confused by that.
I think it's a legal nuance, but my understanding of it, let me just say this, and Brian can wait. I think Brian will probably have a better answer. We're operating the network, right? So our responsibility in operating the network is to clear those hurdles in the compliance section, and we are subject to NEPA and historical preservation statutes and all that stuff federally, so we have to go through that process. But Brian, is there anything addition?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the process that we've employed, and I'm not a lawyer and don't pretend to be one on TV, is that that there's a different way that allows some flexibility of how you can begin that process without having to specifically identify where the sites and locations are. And that's what our legal team is doing, undertaking. So they're kind of building the umbrella of that we know we want to start building this network in these general areas, and it's kind of an umbrella overarching approach. And then that allows us to get the process going so that when we do have a partner on board and we identify the more specific site locations, that we're that much further along the process, and that isn't holding up the deployment of the network. So.
Yeah. And I think it also is tied to the fact that FirstNet is the license holder of the spectrum. I mean, specifically. So if you're going to operate that spectrum and you're the license holder of it, it's sort of like the chain of custody there of responsibility for these things. Yeah. Any other questions? Any concerns about coverage or capacity? Cybersecurity? That's a big one. 911 operating centers, how they interact? Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious if we're using 911 calls as a baseline, you're only going to obviously get calls where the carriers have service and they have service for financial reasons. Is there any way to get information about areas that have needed service that are not covered by the cell carriers?
That was part of the survey process that Karen and her team had sent out surveys everywhere. If you want to answer that.
We mapped every 911 call. So if it was a call from a landline, it's mapped. So while 76% of our calls are wireless, the other 24% that come from a landline are on that map. So we captured everybody that has service that called 911. But we do have areas within California that there are no service, and that's not reflective on the map.
So if there is an interagency or cross-boundary issue, like on an Indian reservation, does their call for EMS support, but it goes to the neighboring county or city, and they respond to it, that call might not show up on the Indian reservation line. It might show up on the border or on the other side. So,
Or I'm wondering, can you get information out of CAD systems? Be another possibility.
We tried. I wish we could. It was an insurmountable challenge. But I think the CAD data would be far better than the 911 data, but we took what we had.
Very, very understandable.
So can I add to that too, that as Karen mentioned, that in this consultation process that we're engaging with states, we believe this to be ongoing. And so it's not like this is you had your chance to get input in and this is what we're going forward with. This is just the first step in the process of continuing that discussion, continuing to gather information, continuing to refine that map to really identify what are those needs, what are those data points, those stakeholder inputs that drive needs within the state. So it's not that the window has been missed. It's just certainly this is just the first kind of snapshot, and you continue to build and refine that, and we'll be revisiting that map and refinements to that throughout consultation.
Greg.
Hi, Keone. I'm Craig with the EMS Authority. And you mentioned capacity, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about capacity, particularly during a large-scale incident. And we know that the more users online at a given time, the tougher it's going to be. How are we going to handle capacity? What are the limitations, and what are we doing to work through some of the problems that may arise?
The good news on capacity is that we have 20 megahertz of spectrum dedicated to us. Now that 20 megahertz is significant and is double over what AT&T and Verizon have now. So in any particular area, on any site, you're going to have the full 20 megahertz available to public safety. Public safety, we will be sharing the excess capacity because it's not envisioned that public safety will be utilizing all of the bandwidth all the time. So there's this whole idea in the economic model of excess capacity lease, which means that the private partner that we choose has the option to leverage and sell excess capacity on our network to commercial folks. But in the event that public safety needs that space, all those users are bumped off the system. So it's the opportunity for them to monetize and use that extra additional spectrum because we can't let it go unused. It's just like, it's not a good idea. But as soon as public safety is an event or emergency, that prioritization will take over and it will bump all of the commercial users off. And it will be transparent to them. They'll just go to their normal LTE, 3G networks on their Verizon or AT&T or their T-Mobile, whatever their normal provider is. But when FirstNet phones are on there and FirstNet devices are there, it will absolutely bump everybody else off and provide you the full 20 megahertz, which is significant. On the technical infrastructure, in terms of the LTE towers and the backhaul, it's intended that we harden these sites, to what we consider a public safety grade, whatever that means for California, so that it is reliable, that it is redundant, that we have capacity in the full tilt of the capacity always available to public safety on any towers. There's no collisions or too many people on one tower. So the technical team is working through those aspects, and the technology is certainly there to do it at this point in time. So we're not really seeing a lot of bottlenecks happening on any individual location or tower at this point that couldn't be avoided with additional LTE repeaters and things like that on the site. So the CTO team in Denver has been working through a lot of these issues in concordance with the Public Safety Research Center for Research, which is PSCR. And they've done a lot of test bed testing of LTE, new next generation LTE cell sites and things like that, and what it means to have the backhaul, fiber backhaul off the towers going to core network that does all the prioritization and preemption. Hope that answered it. Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to add one thing. As Keone mentioned, that there's kind of two forms of priority, I guess you could say, and one is first and foremost the ability to prioritize first responders or public safety on the network against those that are using the excess capacity, or those commercial customers that be leveraging that excess capacity. So when you start to experience congestion and capacity drops down, those users essentially would be, or public safety would get priority access on the network, and those users would essentially be kicked off, or they wouldn't know, public safety wouldn't be impacted during those operations. So they can continue doing operations without any indication that the network was actually becoming somewhat congested because of that secondary use. We expect that over 99% of the time that's the case we'd see, that operations would occur unimpacted to public safety. You're going to get that small percentage of the time, however, even with the amount of public safety responders in an area, you might just start to experience congestion beyond that, just a lot of responders descending in a common area. And then that's where we look at the kind of the second level of what we call QPP, quality of service, priority and preemption. That's where we're working right now, creating the framework to identify the applications, the people, the roles, the functions that would be identified by those different users, and working with stakeholders throughout the next few years to identify what types of policies and procedures do we need to put in place to kind of take that next step to prioritize traffic beyond that, just within the public safety community. So a lot of work has been done to create the framework, that structure, so that we can have discussion around that to figure out operationally how would that get implemented and how would that priority get applied on the network. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of governance and a lot of management issues, but we recognize the importance and significance of that, because even though that 1% or that fraction of the percent when that would actually kick in, that's going to be the most important time of when you want to make sure public safety has access to the network.
And to put that on an EMS perspective, telehealth type applications where you may have the ability to connect with the hospital during a time when you're transporting the injured person. So it's that type of information, again, that we would need to get to FirstNet to make sure that they know what those needs are.
Sounds very promising. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, that's part of when we do the consultation task teams. We want to know what applications they're using, how are you using data. Do you need electronic medical records, to the paramedics? Do they need to know that for a person that's identified in the system, what their insurance is and all this other kind of stuff? I think the answer is yes. So we're trying to capture as much of that detailed information as possible over the next year to build it in. And when Brian was talking about quality of service, the networks try to do that now in terms of implementing a quality of service, which says you can manage up to 25% of the available bandwidth, on our service, and you can manage users inside of there, whether they're doing video or data or email or texting or whatever it is. So it's a similar parameter for FirstNet, but our goal is to make the pipe as big as possible for the surge event. We don't want to be impacted during a surge and have to scramble and change things, on the fly. We'd like that pipe to be as open as possible, and then whatever excess beyond that pipe is available for the excess capacity use, that will be preempted when there's an emergency that goes over that quality of service metric, whatever that is. Any other question?
So you made a comment about FirstNet phones and devices. Could you explain a little bit more what that means as far as the compatibility of existing devices in the public safety realm?
Sure, good question. So a FirstNet device would need to be a phone, tablet, or something like that with what they would call a band class 14 chip. So it's a chipset that would be embedded in the phone. There are currently on most of your iPhones and Samsungs and all of the phones that are out there have like 16 different chips in them already. And you've heard of quad band phones that operate on different frequencies in different countries and things like that. So the band class 14 and that 700 megahertz spectrum will be a chip embedded in a phone. We don't have the devices identified yet. We don't know who's the manufacturer, and the OEM on that stuff, but we do know that we'll need to have a chip embedded in the phone to be able to see the FirstNet network in our spectrum that we're operating. If you have that band class 14 chip, your phone will be eligible as a subscriber on the network. But as a user or subscriber, you need to be authenticated on the network first. So that has to be, there's going to have to be an approval process, an identity management solution that, says you are an eligible user, you are, we know who you are, you're a public safety, you're a firefighter, you're a cop, you're whatever it is, and you can be on the network, and then it will show up on your phone. Instead of it saying Verizon or AT&T, it'll say FirstNet. So you'll be authenticated against your device to access the network. And wherever FirstNet signal is propagated, it'll say FirstNet on your phone, and you'll be on the network using that IP address and the other types of things. So it can be a tablet, it can be a device, some other wireless type of device. It uses the LTE technology to connect, but it will be some kind of handheld mobile technology. Yeah, question in the back.
Yes, I have two questions. How's the data being encrypted? I mean, is it going to be encrypted over the wireless? And second question is it going to be isolated from the commercial data?
I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Security.
So, it's a really good question and one we get frequently. That's a great example of the types of the approach we're taking with our RFP. It's an objective-based RFP. So we're asking for desires of high security, high availability, and we're looking for bidders to propose back the different ways they would achieve those objectives. So we're not putting out a requirements base that says thou shall secure the network to A, B, and C, but we're putting out objectives that we're setting a bar very high to ensure that the network is secured, and that we'll then engage in some type of eventual negotiation as to how that is actually done. We recognize the significance and importance of cybersecurity, and in fact, that was our most recent release around part of our acquisition documents that we've been putting out in draft format. So I believe it was back in the September timeframe, we released our cybersecurity appendix to the RFP package to get some advanced release and get feedback on that and incorporate that. So that's a great, I would say, starting resource to look at how we're approaching and targeting cybersecurity and how we're looking to encrypt traffic on the network and ensure that we're achieving levels of security that kind of go above and beyond what you get with commercial service today. But we also recognize at the same point that we want to allow you to do business the way you do business today. And we can't have security measures that are so high or so stringent that it doesn't allow you to kind of do business today. So we've got to have that flexibility in what we do.
I think that another logical aspect to when you're thinking and you're planning about it is what applications you're using and how is the data is transmitted through that application. So for instance, if you are trying to connect through the FirstNet network to run a plate or a warrant or something like that, and you have to be compliant with CGIS and CLETS and NLETS and NCIC and all of those things, they have their own standards that you have to comply to. So the standard is different than an actual, the cyber framework. I mean, it's just sort of like what we're aspiring to. It doesn't mean that you have to use AES encryption or that you have to use HTTPS or whatever it is. It just means that you have to secure the information going from one place to another, and that can happen in a number of different ways. Right now, people do it through VPN connections that are trusted, but they don't necessarily encrypt data. But as we go forward, encryption is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. It does use bandwidth. It could be an issue, a performance issue in a police car, in a mobile data terminal or something that they don't have enough signal to transmit that level of encryption and data. So it's one of those things we have to kind of watch and balance performance against security, because security is always a trade-off in any cyberspace that you do. And I don't know that encrypting data necessarily means that it's going to be more protected than if it was a dedicated connection. So it's one of those things to look for. I mean, it's really good input and feedback, and it's one of those things we're trying to get more information on how you use applications. What are the applications used in protocols? How do you use data? What's the nature of the data? Is it school data? Is it PII? Is it, like I said, EMR data? Is it HIPAA compliant data? We need to know the whole realm of information that you're trying to exchange, and then we can approach how to best secure it on the network. Yeah, another question in back.
As you're building out the 4G infrastructure, are you guys planning to build network operational centers? And if so, how many do you have planned?
The architecture calls for what we call our core network sites, where obviously we'll traverse the fiber optic network and throughout the country. And then the RAN is the radio access network. That's the wireless piece, right? And that'll be different in every city and where it's located. So I guess at the core network sites, there'd be a lot of control and, and aspects, to deal with that. We don't have the exact number. We're waiting for our partner to kind of propose how they think they're going to meet the objectives and what would be required for them to do that. So a lot of them, as you know, already have NOCs and network operating centers, security operations centers that deal with their current wireless networks, that are deployed throughout the country. So we're hoping to find some synergies there, because it'd be cost prohibitive for us to try to build data centers everywhere. And remember, FirstNet as a network, it's a licensed radio spectrum, right, in 700 megahertz, band class 14 D Block. At its lowest level, FirstNet is transport. Network IP transport for data. FirstNet is not necessarily, an application provider, a data center. We don't create data. You're not going to build data centers to do data as a service and necessarily any of those types of things. Those are applications above the transport layer. So we're doing transport first, and then we're asking questions about the applications and how the data is used, so we can tune the network to match that use and that utilization. Any other questions? Okay, do you want to move to the next piece? All right, we'll move on to the next part of the agenda.
There's one thing I wanted to add as far as the opting in and opting out. If your department does not want to use FirstNet, you don't have to. Nobody has to subscribe. So if a city or a county doesn't want to subscribe, they don't have to. So part of FirstNet's challenge, what makes this so important, is that they need to make this desirable, which again comes back to making sure that we're getting the correct data to give FirstNet to build the network that we'll use. So when you're looking at maybe some folks will subscribe to the network and some folks won't, we'll have new challenges on mutual aid responses that we will have to look at the governance structure and look at how we're going to communicate when we get there on a data perspective. Okay, now I just had to add that as we were talking. Next on the agenda is Bob Weidman, and he's from SAIC, and he's going to give a more detailed, can't even talk, summary of where we're at in California with FirstNet.
Thank you. See if I can do two things at once here and not get this messed up. In Karen's presentation, there was some discussion about the proposed coverage map, and those maps across the country have become known as proposed coverage maps, even though that's never was the intent in the first place. It was an intent to frame a discussion. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what's in it and why it's there and what it means and what it doesn't mean. So again, the coverage objectives are particularly important. And as outreach has gone on for the past several years, I mean, the act was in 2012 and we're 3 years in now, the beating of the drum consistently was coverage. We want coverage, we want it everywhere, we want it all the time. Coverage is always the big issue. However, it's not a standalone issue. There's also, it's affected by the users and how you operate that, and that affects the capacity. And of course, that's always compared to your current particular service. So this is what is known as the proposed baseline or the coverage area for California. And of course, these were done for each and every state all across the country. Now, if you look at that, and many of you have probably seen this before, but there's a lot of space that you're not seeing anything in particular. Obviously, in the urban South Coast area, in the Bay Area, there's a lot of red. There's red around Sacramento, and those particular urban areas. But outside of that, you see some shading that's a little, the green shading, or you see nothing. And so we get the impression that, well, that's where the coverage is going to be, or that's where there is an intent to build a system. And that's not really accurate. What this is again, a seeding of a discussion. Now, how that actually turns out once the bid is awarded, we'll have to see. But it's not really a prediction of what the service requirements are going to be. In fact, and this is the national map, and of course you can see the farther east you go, the more urban it is, that the more the pixels are colored in. But the map was created for the nation and each state based on a few simple things. One is an employee count of law enforcement, fire, and EMS in particular areas. And the higher the number of the employee counts, the dot got put in there in a particular place. There's also an assessment of public safety high-risk areas of interest. And of course, that comes from the Homeland Security process that was started after 9/11 to identify what areas or targets there might be that we were concerned about. There's also a component from the U.S. populations, from the Census Bureau. How dense is the population? There is, from mapping, an assessment of buildings and developed areas, and that colors the map. And then, of course, major roadways throughout the U.S., interstates, U.S. highways, state highways, and so forth. So the process is not particularly complicated in that for each one of these sort of events, a dot was put on the map. If you get enough dots in 1 square mile, it changes the color. And that's how it goes from light green to dark green to red. It's just number of dots in a 1 square mile area. Okay? So you don't want to read too much into this. At the same time, it's useful to understand what that means. And as that baseline comes out, then we ask, well, what do we do with that? What happens next? Okay? Now, another factor in looking at all that, in particular in the West, is that as the first map was created, it excluded federal lands and excluded tribal areas. So where in the country is most of the federal land? Well, it's in the West. Okay? California's got a lot of federal land, so do a lot of other states in the West. And you can see in this particular case, if you color in that area, that explains why a lot of that is empty. Okay? Now, as state agencies, city agencies, and county agencies, particularly in the West, you also know that if there's a response into that federal land, you're not calling the federal government. Cities, counties, states do that. So just like fires, I mean, many of the wildfires, of course, are on BLM land or Forest Service land. Those fire services participate, but there's a lot of state and local resource that goes into that. Similarly, from a law enforcement standpoint, if there's a search and rescue operation in a federal land area, who goes? Local search and rescue goes. So who has the communication need? Well, it's local governments, counties, and states that have that need. So that's certainly going to be an issue. California also has some unique things. California, particularly, has over 100 recognized tribes, and the tribal lands are often in remote rural areas. These areas often have limited wireless service or no wireless service, but still require public safety response. California, probably more than any other state, has significant wildfire threats. Those tend to happen in areas that are not urban, and of course, therefore, are not colored in on the proposed coverage map quite as well. Certainly, Southern California has more fire threat closer to urban areas than many states do. But again, a lot of that threat in the colored areas not only goes there, but reaches up into the less populated northern part of the state and into the Sierra. Earthquake zones. California it has a greater than average threat to earthquakes, certainly, as we know. That has an impact, not only on response, but also, like the fire, they're a threat to the network, not just a threat or a challenge in response. In particular with earthquakes, or for example with earthquakes. The radio access network is predicated on receiving signals from a device to the tower, but then also from the tower back to the cores and the switching points. That's called the backhaul network. Much of the backhaul is done by microwave. Microwave towers require the transmitter and receiver over distances to be very carefully aligned and aimed. It's a narrow beam. A little wiggling in the ground is not good for that. Gets out of whack, the communication's dead. Earthquake problems, of course, and the threats of earthquake are substantial. And so we see that from the U.S. Geological Survey, that, again, not only is it a response problem, does it create a response need, it also is a threat to that network. There were some questions about the 911 calls and so forth. And so we have that overlay there. These are the 911 call representations. And of course, it's derived from the 911 centers. It captures all the calls coming in, not necessarily capturing them where they were placed, but where they're received. And of course, question came up about the CAD systems and what about drawing incident level information from CAD systems. Difficulty with that, of course, is that CAD systems are not acquired or operated on any sort of a state standard as are the 911 system. And so as a result of that, it's predicated on each individual CAD system operator or vendor in many cases pulling the data to send it in, which turns out to be disparate. And so that's much more difficult. Coverage objectives and next steps. Outreach, of course, began not long after the law was passed 3 years ago. And outreach initially through these town hall meetings and so forth, websites and whatnot, has been aimed at making all of you as stakeholders aware of the system and the fact that it's coming. We're reaching a point where it's coming pretty soon. It's no longer really theoretical. You know, the RFP should be out, our target is by the end of this year. Through the course of 2016, FirstNet will be engaged in a lot of work to try and parse through the received proposals, to try and make a decision to award a contract to a vendor to operate the system. And so at that point, the move to the stakeholders is going to change somewhat. And along with that, though, we will continue to reach out to as broad a base of stakeholders as we can in this process, which will include certainly chief information officers on a network basis, collaborating with fellow western states, local law enforcement, fire services and EMS, transportation agencies, emergency management services, public safety answering points, federal agencies, military utilities, and so forth. Next steps are continue to collaborate with stakeholders, and as Ms. Wong pointed out, town hall meetings will probably become a thing of the past, and it will be a migration of stakeholder engagement towards governance support and the CTTs. Okay? Now that's a very important step as this moves forward. Once the RFP is awarded and steps move forward to actually have a vendor to operate this, it will move forward to a point where it turns on. The Act of 2012, which created FirstNet, also has a hard stop, which is in 2022. If it is not substantially built, the Department of Commerce has to stop and give the money back to Congress. So the clock ticks. It needs to get moving. Once a vendor is selected, there will be pressure to make progress, to move, to turn it on. As was pointed out, a movement is going forward to a private-public partnership. That does not suggest that once this is awarded, a lot of bulldozers and backhoes are going to roll out and they're going to start building towers. That suggests that reliance will be made on existing infrastructure. Probably that infrastructure owned by an existing carrier. That would certainly make the best sense. So in that regard, it's not a brand new greenfield sort of build of new infrastructure and towers that creates this. The first early iteration of that is likely to be based on towers and carriers that already exist, but doing it in a different way, operating as FirstNet, and having the license to use the 700 megahertz D Block radio spectrum as opposed to doing it on their existing spectrum. But the towers and all is probably still the same. The idea of a greenfield build is difficult. There are in excess of 300,000 cell phone towers across America. To try and duplicate even what's available commercially is not realistic. Therefore, it's going to have to go with that private-public sort of partnership and move forward in that way. There have been a lot of questions that have come out. We've talked about the issues and touched on the issue of priority and preemption and local control. Those have been selling points of FirstNet in the outreach phase. However, we haven't confronted yet what does that mean. And does priority and preemption and local control necessarily mean the same thing to a state agency that it means to a local agency? As we all know in conducting business with our agencies, that federal agencies, state agencies, county agencies, city agencies are doing business in the same real estate. So with that factor, at a given location, who has local control? And what does local control do in the event someone exercises it? What is the effect on somebody else? How do you work through that? That's what governance is probably going to have to be about, those types of issues. The issues of who has priority. We had a great question about EMS and priority on obviously the live real-time transmission of patient telemetry between an ambulance and a hospital is potentially a great thing, but it may also be a bandwidth hog. We've also had a lot of ideas about using video for law enforcement, live scene video back to a command center, also a data hog. What does that do to your partners? How do we resolve that? And those issues are all up in the air. And this process of moving forward to engagement toward governance and the CTTs begins to start addressing those issues. How do we make that happen? How do we reach agreement? How do we establish some means to resolve conflict? If an entity has a lower priority and thinks they should have a higher priority, how do we deal with that? Is there a hearing? Do we talk about it? Who makes that decision? All of those things get complicated, but are vitally important on our ability to use this system successfully together into the future to have things go better. So certainly, thoughts that you might have going forward in preparation for this, how you might want to influence this on behalf of your agency might be important to think about. Great time for a question.
Hi, Mitch Matigovich. I have a question, and I don't know, you have to defer to phone a friend behind you, but how are you going to make the selection when they go to the RFP? How are they going to select which, when you're trying to do it for the entire country, which provider, or what are your considerations for provider selection for that? So in other words, how do we ensure that California is represented properly based off of who is selected on the RFP? Based on the structure that's going to exist in the civil industry that's out there, because there's a handful of biggies.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So right now, that's the whole intent of the consultation process, is that we have this dialogue back and forth with the state. We gather your inputs, your needs, your desires, your priorities. We roll that into the RFP and the acquisition package. But ultimately, FirstNet owns that acquisition and that contract that we're going to negotiate with a potential partner. And then we'll have that dialogue with states after award of that contract as well. So right now, we're in that phase of gathering all that input, having that dialogue to feed into it. We've done a lot of iterations on that RFP, making it available in different draft formats so that there's opportunities for states and constituents and vendors to provide comments and feedback on it along the way. We've tried to be very transparent in the way we've conducted that so that there's no surprises when we go out. And then once we release that RFP, it will be between FirstNet and the partners to negotiate what that looks like, and then we would take that back in draft format, populate it into a draft state plan, and then have another round of consultation to say, this is the contract, we felt that based on the collective input of public safety across the country, that this is the best value, the best potential network we can deliver nationwide, and then have another dialogue with you around that and explain, you know, the trade-offs and whatever we can get into to help explain how we arrived at that decision. And then we have an opportunity to collect your feedback before anything gets finalized and eventually goes to the governor for that final decision. As far as how it gets evaluated, when we release the RFP at the end of this calendar year, that will again be another opportunity that we fully expect, you know, several months of comments and feedback that we can take into consideration, included which are the evaluation criteria. So that'll be an opportunity for you to kind of see how are we intending to evaluate the bidders and give you an opportunity to provide that feedback. Does that help answer your question?
It all goes back to the information we give FirstNet. If we don't give FirstNet a good picture of what California needs from our public safety entities, they cannot put enough information together in the RFP to give California what it needs. It really is a collaborative process. And so the better information we can give FirstNet, the more information we can give FirstNet, the better we're going to end up through the RFP process. When the state consultation, when the state plan comes out, it's going to be reflective of all the information that we've received from all of the stakeholders.
We did explore, I think, what you're getting at too. How could we incorporate state and local input on the actual RFP evaluation? We explored that. There was a lot of discussion around how it could work, how we can incorporate that. You know, this is going to be a pretty significant evaluation and a pretty considerable time effort that goes into that. And when you, with the risk that's inherent with that, I mean, it's going to be very tightly controlled. And so we're going to go into lockdown mode, and the evaluation team is going to go be hidden for, you know, the amount of months it takes to come up with that evaluation. And I think ultimately it just became very challenging to try to figure out how we could take anyone outside the organization and expect them to kind of commit that type of time and resource to it.
Almost all of you in the room, you know, looking at the sign-in sheet, work for government at one level or another. And so there's a couple things I know that you know from your experience. One, nothing's easy. And two, everything's a compromise. FirstNet has a very difficult job in trying to choose this vendor. And there's going to be things people like and things people don't, and there's just no way around that. But the important part is, certainly in an engagement process, and the reason that all this goes on is to say, think about the issues and get involved. You know, understand and get your voice heard to influence the process as best you can. If stakeholders do not do that, they're just going to get what they get. But at least try to get what you think you want or you think you should have. So what, you know, again, what can you do? Well, you can, you know, spread the word. You can, you know, have your company reps, you know, send you or get you on the lists. You can attend pre-solicitation conference meetings. You can become familiar with the draft RFP and see what it says. You can contact large service providers offering to team with them. You can, you know, check FirstNet and Fed Biz Ops websites. But mostly, you need to think about the issues that are coming and get engaged. In California, the First Responder Network, the board, lots of great people on that board. They're engaged, they're trying to do the right thing, but they need your help. They need the input from the people like you who are stakeholders to try and drive its decisions to the best place it can be. I would certainly encourage you not to sit back. It's coming sooner than you think. Any other questions? Thank you for your attention.
Okay, and before we do go on break, and we're a little bit behind, but we can get caught up, we have a map that we want to show you. Brian Hobson brought a map with him, and he will explain it, regarding the rural coverage. And when I saw it, he showed it to me really quick. It is a very good depiction of rural, not only in the United States, but in California.
Yeah, let me stand up to explain this. So, as Karen mentioned, one of the activities we have in kind of deciphering our law and getting feedback was there was a lot of discussions around rural and ensuring that we are embracing and delivering service and a solution that's going to meet the rural needs of the nation, and that we're not kind of falling into that traditional mold that you see within the commercial deployments of really targeting and focusing on the urban areas. So one of the key starting points of doing this was to first and foremost go with a definition of rural. If you've ever kind of done the research in defining, what is rural versus non-rural, I think we've stopped at around 25 or 30 different definitions. So we needed to settle on one. We did this through the public notice process. We released our proposed definition of what was rural and what was non-rural or urban. We got a lot of feedback on that topic. We incorporated that feedback and ultimately recently released our kind of final interpretation of rural. And essentially we adopted the Rural Electrification Act. As Karen had read out, it's basically looking at population centers by saying any population center that's 20,000 or more, or any population center that's adjacent or contiguous to a population center that's more than 50,000. So if you have a very large population center and there's some small ones adjacent or contiguous to it that are less than 20,000, but they're still adjacent, they would still get kind of picked up into that non-rural definition. And essentially that means that everything else is considered rural. So that is the definition that we put out in writing. So we took the next step and they said, how can we kind of put this into practice and map it to kind of show stakeholders what that translates to? And this is the map that we just recently completed that we'll be putting out and releasing. So everyone kind of gets a sense of how we've interpreted that decision to define urban or non-rural areas from rural areas. And this is the map that shows that, the blue area. You can see that from a land area perspective, this is only about 2.5% of the land area in the United States is considered non-rural or urban in this definition. And so thus 97.5% would be considered rural. This will be important as we get into one of the other key components of our acquisition and deployment, and that is ensuring the law stated very explicitly that as we build and deploy this network, we must achieve rural milestones at each phase of the network. And essentially what that means is, as we build this network, we can't do it sequentially where we focus first on urban and later on rural. We need to make sure that we're addressing a build out in rural areas through each phase of that network in those 5 years. So this will just help us kind of delineate between those two areas, and then we'll have further discussion about what that deployment looks like in those rural communities. Any questions on that? Karen, did you want anything to add?
Test. The good news about this map, the very good news about this, is since we have a quantitative measurement of substantial rural milestone in our build out, that based on the coverage objectives that California has stated and the amount of rural classification we have, there will be substantial rural build out. So that's good news for California. It's good news for FirstNet that we can meet those milestones based on this definition. But it can be alarming to think that much of the country and the territories are rural, but I mean, that's essentially what it is based on the legal definition. So I think it works in our favor to really create that relationship so that there is no urban development without rural development. That is the key. It doesn't go, like Brian was saying, it's not sequential. It's not metro urban first, rural second. It's both at the same time in parallel, at the same proportion of build out through the 5 phases over the 5 years.
Any questions? Okay, no hands? Okay, we're gonna take a 10-minute break, and so we'll be back here about 25 after 2. Thanks.
So the purpose of this panel today is to get an idea of sort of technology today. There's some innovations going on in the technology world. I mean, when we're talking about FirstNet, we're really talking about a technology here moving forward. And we have some of the best people on the panel to discuss these different aspects. And I think what we're going to see as the course of this discussion is the convergence of these ideas, the innovation in technology, and how they're moving towards sort of the FirstNet solution, and how they can add to it, make it better, and so forth. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, the agency they're from, and a little bit of their background, and then we'll get into the discussion. So we'll start on this end.
Oh, thank you. I'm Rob Schmidt. I'm the new Chief of Office of Technology Services, part of California Department of Technology. This is our state data center. So I have over 500 customers statewide. These are state departments, boards, commissions, local government, and many of you in our audience who are from the public safety sector. My prior role, I was the Agency Information Officer and Chief Information Officer for California Department of Food and Agriculture. So what I hope to share today is probably, I think, some stories that I found out in the field, because I was out in the farm fields of California, which is very disconnected from our broadband in California. And what I see here is FirstNet is a springboard for innovation that can lead to many new things for the commercial sector. So as I was out there trying to solve problems for agriculture, we had to find a lot of workarounds because there was no connectivity. So hopefully I can get some of those words in today. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian.
So my name is Brian Hobson with FirstNet. I've been on board with FirstNet for about 1.5 years now, which is makes me a very senior person within the organization. Beyond that, actually, would work very closely with the FirstNet team, just in a different capacity, working with Department of Homeland Security. So, I mean, our involvement in this dates back almost to the inception. I mean, we were involved in a lot of the initial meetings. So it's been a great opportunity to kind of really see this progress, both inside the fence and outside the fence. Prior to that, had worked a lot with public safety across the country, working in different DHS programs. So we've had the opportunity to work with public safety and a lot of the same stakeholders on communications, in particular at land mobile radio. So this has been a fun transition over into broadband and some of the new capabilities that we anticipate this will bring.
Thank you, Brian. Craig?
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Craig Johnson, and I work for the California Emergency Medical Service Authority. And I've been with the state for about 6 years now, and I'm the manager for the Response Resources Unit, where we do have some very robust mobile medical assets that we can deploy into the field, like California Medical Assistant Teams, you may have heard of, Disaster Medical Support Unit, vehicles that support our ambulance strike teams. We have mission support teams, and a number of other mobile medical assets that we support in the field during a disaster response. As far as my background, prior to coming to the state, I had over 20 years of military experience, really in the hospital community. I did a number of things. I was the National Disaster Medical System Manager here at David Grant for Northern California, also the Federal Coordinating Center Coordinator for Northern California. So a lot of background with disaster response, building relationships with the counties within the state, and doing everything that we can to provide a very effective, efficient response during a disaster. So happy to be here today. Hope to talk to you a little bit about what are some of our challenges at the EMS Authority and how FirstNet maybe can meet some of those challenges and where we're headed in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Pat.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Pat Mellon. I'm the Executive Director for the LA RICS project. That's the Los Angeles Regional Interoperable Communication System. My background is I spent 36 years with LA County Sheriff's Department, retiring as a commander 12 years ago. Since that time, I've been involved in, and actually before that, I was also involved in some, doing some project management on some construction projects. Just a little bit about LA RICS is we are one of 5 early builders of the public safety broadband network in the country. We're the largest of the 5. We received in 2010 a $154 million grant from NTIA to be one of the early builders, and then with the implementation of the First Responders Network Authority, FirstNet, in 2012, we executed a spectrum lease agreement with FirstNet, and we have, as of today, deployed 63 fixed sites and 14 cell on wheels, serving the urban area of the County of Los Angeles. That will give us reliable outdoor mobile coverage throughout the urban area of the county. Of the 4,000 square miles, that'll cover about 3,000 square miles. The rest of it is the Angeles National Forest and Santa Monica Mountains. We're really looking forward to the PSBN being up and running, because one of the strategies in accommodating the requirements of the legislation that created FirstNet was the vacation or the leaving or give back of the T-band UHF frequencies to FCC so that they could be auctioned. In Los Angeles, public safety agencies, that's police, fire, and EMS, operate on about 600 of the UHF channels. They have to vacate in 2023. So the philosophy or the strategy in being able to migrate off of the UHF and to move on to a very limited number of 700 megahertz channels is we're looking to the PSBN to be able to support routine voice communication so we can save those 700 megahertz narrowband channels for critical voice.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Ferdinand?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Ferdinand Malanes. I manage Caltrans, California Department of Transportation's Public Safety Communication Systems. Been with Caltrans since 1998. And throughout my career with Caltrans, I've been lucky enough to be appointed to some national committees, one of which is the Department of Homeland Security SAFECOM Emergency Response Council, where I represent the 50 DOTs. Prior to that, I worked at the Department of Water Resources, their fiber optic network, and prior to that, I worked with the then Department of General Services Telecom Division, now Public Safety Communications Office, for about 8-9 years, working with microwave radio systems. So today I hope to share with you what types of communication systems Caltrans employs and some of the things that hopefully FirstNet can bring to us. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ferdinand. We're missing Scott Howland from CHP, but we do have some CHP representation here today, so they can chime in if they see fit in the conversation. Thank you. And for myself, Keone Kali, again, Region 9 lead for FirstNet. You may or may not know, my background is I lived and worked in California for 18 years before I moved back to Hawaii, where I was from. And in that time in California, I was the CIO last post was the CIO for the city of Beverly Hills, which is a very unique, interesting opportunity in Southern California. In Hawaii, I was the state CIO for the state of Hawaii. Also worked with the DoD and the university on some programs overseas for disaster resilience in Southeast Asia countries. So quite a bit of experience in those geographies in the Asia Pacific area and arena, and especially in California. So in California, I've worked with the Edison International. I've worked with a lot of cities and counties. And this is my first foray to Sacramento with the state, and it's been great. I think we really have a good brain trust up here, and some of these panelists are very talkative. So let's kick it off, and then if there are any questions from the audience, or you guys would like to ask any zingers out there, please hit them hard, okay? So we'll start with technology today, trends, some of the things you're seeing. We'll do a little 5-minute presentation, each of you, on what's going on.
Well, first I need to turn off my phone.
Yeah? Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So for the past 5 years, as I mentioned, I've been working in my prior job with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And a lot of what I did there and what I accomplished was around disruptive technology, social mobile analytics riding on the cloud wrapped by a layer of security. And we took that as our mantra. My developer team looked at what was available to us. And so first I'll talk about some of the issues we had with disruptive technologies. One is, as we looked at the work we were doing, we had 900 employees working out in the field and literally in the farm fields, in the muck of the farm fields. And so simple things like dust, water, mud, cow poop, these were problems for us. And then, looking at things such as the connectivity availability, we had to develop our applications around the mantra that we assumed there was no connectivity, that we would sync up at some later time in the day. So leveraging social mobile and analytics on the cloud wrapped in a layer of security got us moving forward. It actually took us about 2 to 3 years for our team to develop the skills they needed to leverage those new disruptive technologies. We had to retrain them. And not just in training them how to write the code, but how to develop for those platforms. This was new to us. So as we look at mobile technology, it's not just one platform. There are hundreds of different types of Android devices, tablets, phones, et cetera, different manufacturers. So we had to standardize. We actually standardized on an Apple phones and Apple tablets because it was much simpler for us. We had a small team. And that was helpful. And then we had to work with the communities. We had to get collaboration with the different county ag commissioners that we worked with and help them understand why we were standardizing so they could leverage our platform. We also had to learn new coding techniques with HTML5 so it would work across multiple devices. And some of the things that we saw out in the field are this. So as we're talking about the network and focusing on that for a moment, the network that I now support at California Department of Technology is this. Network sustainability. We need a network that's reliable and resilient. And so as I talk to folks in the public safety area, when it comes to the state network, we're talking about redundancy. That you can't just have one type of connectivity to get your communications, you need multiple. Testing. Testing was critical for us in agriculture, making sure our applications worked in many different situations. As I talked about is some of the environmentals in California are pretty extreme. You could be out in the Mojave, being out in the desert area where it's 120 degrees in the shade, or being in Lake Tahoe where it's maybe -5 degrees. So we have to be able to figure out how does our equipment work in that situation. And then coverage. Working in agriculture, I found traveling all over California, I was surprised to see how many areas weren't covered. And so how do you work with that? So, as I look at this, as far as the value proposition of FirstNet, I see that the reliable broadband connectivity and the nationwide coverage are a tremendous asset for us. I see this as opening many doors for developers. And so as someone who works in state government, I'm very glad to see this, and I look forward to this new system.
Thank you. I think you bring up a really interesting point. We're talking about converging ideas, and we look at the operating culture of an agency. So in rural and ag and everything, 2.5 years, I think you said was a timeline to train your people, retrain, get them up to speed with the latest standards. With FirstNet, I mean, we're looking at the same sort of window, 2.5 years. So like if I take fire as an example, have you operationalized use of data in your operation? I mean, it's different for every fire company, that's out there in every agency, whether they're using records management or they're using paramedic reports, digital reports that are filed, whether you have your pre-attack plans digitized, hydrant maps, whatever it might be. And if the organization's not ready for it, the technology is not going to work for you. It's not going to give you a lot of value. So the key to, from my perspective, the FirstNet, and engaging all of you in this conversation is what's your preparedness for using data on the job? How is that going to make your job easier or better? Is this tool going to have a lot of value for you, or is it not? Not so much the connection issues, but how do you use it? How do you operationalize that? Is it in your SOPs? Or do you go to the to the computer, the MDT, to check data first before you run into a building to see if there's plans or if there's any other activity, building inspector showing up? Do you have any?
Yeah, so some points on that is looking at the field of agriculture, we actually have inspectors and investigators ourselves, non-safety, but we do have investigators. And some things we talked about were the abilities to use location services, knowing where we are, correlating that information with intelligence databases that we had of who owned the property, what was on the property, what kind of animals were on the property, any kind of gate codes or other information. And then going further, we've talked with folks that supply information from social media. Correlating a location with social media gives you information that you'd be shocked. Photographs, videos, and other information that tell you about that location. So our investigators can have a more complete understanding before they go there.
Yeah. So, I'll bring it back to, I'll keep using fire as an example here because it's really relevant. Is it a multi-story building, right? Changes what you do when you get there. Are there people with chronic conditions that are inventoried that you already know how to respond to that, emergency? And Craig can maybe talk about that and what the relevance is of that patient information coming through for an EMS call. But, okay. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions related to what the example they did in agriculture and rural related to connectivity? Yeah, question here.
Yeah, a lot I hear about FirstNet is the network itself, but a lot of what you're talking about is above layer 3. It's application development that could be done and hosted on any network platform. What makes FirstNet so special?
The dedicated spectrum of that transport layer of the network is unique, and it's not duplicated anywhere. Having public safety have access to that 20 megahertz of bandwidth in the 700 megahertz frequency, that D block, band class 14, is unique. And that's a lot of bandwidth and a lot of space for public safety to use. And that's a big differentiating factor between the commercial networks and the FirstNet network. So transport layer was dedicated. That's the key. The applications will go on. The applications are the drivers for adoption of how we utilize the network and make use of it and transact data and things like that. But ultimately, FirstNet, the transport layer is unique because it's fully dedicated to public safety. Hope that answers your question.
I mean, I'm just trying to understand the scope of FirstNet because we talk a lot in this room about the applications that will be running on the network itself. And I understand the bandwidth allocation and having it being segmented from the public. But I really don't understand how we're selling FirstNet as an application system because a lot of these applications are going to come up and be built out irregardless of whether FirstNet exists or not.
No, that is true. So we're not selling FirstNet as the application provider. Applications may have to run through, some sort of certification type process in an app store that runs that is served out on the network, but application development is independent of the FirstNet physical network.
Let me add this too. What I'm hoping for really from FirstNet is to fill in the gaps of the coverage. Right now, as you. The AT&Ts, the Verizons, so they go to areas where it's ROI. That's their bottom line, right? Return on investment. Since this is a public safety focused network, I'm hoping that FirstNet will go to where those ROIs are not important. Hey, this is where public safety needs the coverage. This is where FirstNet's going to go. This is where it's needed. ROI is not the bottom line. It's where does public safety need coverage that is not available today.
Yeah, I think that is the opportunity that we have through this project. So let's move on to the next. Brian will do a little presentation technology today.
So that's actually a great kind of segue into a few of the things that I wanted to talk about, specifically about what is the value proposition of FirstNet overall, and what are we really doing with this opportunity that we have here to focus on the resources and that we have at hand, both the cash we have, the $7 billion, and the spectrum that we have that many anticipate is actually worth more than that $7 billion. And the opportunity to build out a nationwide network. And so I think it's important to remember how we got here and what drove this. And that, that prior to this, there was a lot of challenges, obviously, with the way public safety networks were deployed, specifically for voice operations, where it was really locally focused. It was what was kind of considered a niche market. So it allowed for great autonomy and control over building those networks, but it created barriers for building a true nationwide network that would eliminate some of those barriers nationwide. And the market never really had that focus, that opportunity to really grow and expand and tackle a lot of things that weren't able to be tackled because there just weren't the resources, the time, and allows a lot of grassroots volunteer efforts. So we really see this as an opportunity to not only build and deploy a network that's going to be very robust, deliver the coverage capacity and the capability, but there's a lot of other activities going on around it that sometimes get lost in the mix. And when you look at those collectively, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for what we're doing. And I just kind of wanted to share with you a couple of those things that I think are very germane to the point you raised there. This opportunity to really have the money, the resources, the focus, we've seen a lot of examples of how this is now creating the structure, the focus, the resources. We can start leveraging those economies of scale by building on commercial technologies and layer on those public safety requirements that I don't think we really saw prior to this. And so that's been really exciting to kind of see how that's grown and see those opportunities that I think that will really kind of grow and expand and provide a great opportunity to really create an ecosystem where public safety can flourish from a network standpoint, from an application standpoint, from a device standpoint. That when you have those economies of scale, you have that complete ecosystem, that's when things really take off and grow. And so I see there's a lot of opportunity there, and I'll give a few examples. So as you know, LTE and what we plan to deploy is built on global standards. There's a lot of standards that were specific and important to public safety that we're having a hard time getting traction on prior to FirstNet because they just didn't have the collective voice to drive a lot of those activities within those standards body. Once FirstNet came about, and kind of the collective public safety voice throughout the world, we saw a lot of those needs for public safety advancements really get prioritized in the standards group. So really focusing on enhanced location services within the standards so that you can track, in a consistent manner the location of devices and be able to share that information. That's something that we see can be tremendous value, that in the applications and the services that can be a standard baseline function that's provided for everyone that has a device that has access, and then thus we get access into that. Push to talk, mission critical push to talk. How can we ride those types of services over this type of network? That was always a long-term desire and vision of this that had a lot of difficulties trying to get going within the standards body. Once FirstNet came about, we've seen that get elevated and prioritized, and now that has become one of the most important services that's being focused in the standards development. So we're seeing mission critical push to talk and some of those underlying functions be able to support that. So proximity services or group communications, those functions that allow for device-to-device communications and ultimately will allow mission critical push to talk to occur. If we're going to deploy a network that's going to prioritize traffic for public safety, we need to know who those public safety users are on the network. So there's what we call ICAM, or Identity Credentialing and Access Management. This has now become the foundation for how are we going to solve this issue of identification and access control and management of public safety users. So we ensure that everyone that's on the network and getting priority access on the network is certified and credentialed to be operating on that network. That was something that was always been a desire within the public safety community, very difficult to achieve because there just wasn't that catalyst, there wasn't that foundation with which to do that. NG911, Next Generation 911, is another one that's a complementary technology. It's independent of FirstNet, but we've seen a lot of synergies there, and that has been another opportunity, I think, where kind of working together that we can see the advancements of both FirstNet and NG911. And actually, in the legislation that passed FirstNet and allocated the $7 billion for our network deployment, it saw that there was that vision, that foresight to look at some of these other synergistic technologies and developments. So NG911 was funded to help kind of really spur and focus activities around that. Additionally, recognizing that there needed to be some centralized, focused research and development that's put into public safety specific requirements. That was another grant program that was provisioned within the law, and with the recent auctions that generated that revenue, that's going to come to fruition. So that program is just getting underway. It's going to start with $100 million in investment, and ultimately with some provisions will grow to $300 million, where their focus is going to be solely how do we take public safety specific requirements, research, analyze, and make sure that they get folded in and can ride on top of this network. So those are all, I think, examples of how there's a lot of activities going on just outside the kind of the narrow focus of how do we build and deploy a network that's going to serve public safety. And the example I gave too of the services, the global services, we're now seeing that they're targeting building equivalent networks in both United Kingdom and South Korea. So that's been another great opportunity, and we've been partnering there and trying to see what lessons learned we can gain from that, and seeing what we can learn from that. So overall, we see a tremendous opportunity with the focus, the structure, the resources we now have at hand, and that we can look at this nationwide, that we're really looking and excited that this is going to create the ecosystem for public safety to really flourish and really advance the applications and services that will be available.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Any questions, immediate questions off of that? No? Okay. Craig, please enlighten us on the challenges and opportunities.
There are a couple primary trends within the EMS community in California as it pertains to FirstNet in California. And these two primary trends that we're seeing in EMS community are interoperable communications and health information exchange. These are big deals for us. So we are excited about the prospect of FirstNet California and what they can potentially do for our community. Within California, we have 58 counties. We have 33 local EMS agencies. We have over 60,000 EMTs. We have over 20,000 paramedics. We have 3,600 ambulances within the state, 2,400 operate at any given time. One of the significant issues that we have in the state is that within the 58 counties, we all do things a little differently. We have a number of disparate systems in use. So interoperable communications and health information exchange is a big deal for the EMS community, and it's where we're trending. Imagine, if you will, a large-scale incident. And let me just say before that, the EMS community does a great job of responding to emergencies, treating patients, transporting patients. We do a great job of responding to disasters within our state, particularly within a county. It's handled very well. The difficulties arise when we have a large-scale incident where we have multiple counties involved, maybe even more than one region of the state involved. Now we have many responders on scene. We have a number of responding agencies, but we're not on one single dedicated network. We're using different systems. We're not completely interoperable. So this poses challenges for us. You know, and the last time I was here at the state consultation, I talked about the Orland bus crash, which happened up in Glenn County, where there were 32 patients transported to hospitals. And it was in a rural area, but just for that bus crash, we had over 8 counties involved. So when we're thinking about interoperable communication and what FirstNet may bring to the table, it's important for us to be able to respond in a very effective manner where we're able to communicate and transfer and share patient data over one single dedicated, secure, bidirectional network. Right now, we don't have that. And things can get very difficult. I mean, during the Orland bus crash, one of the problems that we had was tracking where the patients were going. That was difficult for us. It took a considerable amount of time to gather that information. Another thing we're thinking about, well, that's very important for us, is health information exchange. We're talking about telemedicine and paramedicine. When we're transporting patients, even within an ambulance, from one location to another, and maybe the transport is over a fairly long haul, being able to have that communication back to an ED, you know, right there within the vehicle would be, you know, critical. Any type of video conferencing, video telemedicine, video medicine, anything like that would greatly improve our patient care ability. So these things are very important to us. The real-time data sharing between partners on scene. That's what FirstNet can potentially bring to us, and that we're excited about and looking towards. So what are some of the things that FirstNet can help us to mediate some of these challenges and the trends that we're going towards is bandwidth for secure bidirectional transmission of patient information. Having that enough bandwidth to be able to do that, to be able to transfer that patient data, whether it's video teleconferencing or paramedicine, whatever it might be, to be able to have that. Also having a reliable network that we can depend on, that's secure, that's bidirectional. Also, adequate coverage in our rural areas, and this is an area that is of concern, and we've talked a lot about the rural areas, but 5 of our last multi-casualty incidents involving buses were in rural areas. Being able to have adequate access in the rural areas is critical to us, and I think hopefully FirstNet can help us in that area. And also having scalable for emerging technologies and capable of supporting legacy systems. And this is another concern, because as we move to FirstNet, are we going to be able to support the legacy systems that we have and are using now? So where are we headed in the future? Exchange of real-time patient health information to improve clinical decision-making on scene. That's where we're headed. I talked to you earlier, I mentioned that we have California Medical Assistance Teams. These are teams of medical professionals that can respond to a disaster on scene. And it would be great to be able to provide that sort of bandwidth that we need for telemedicine right there in the field. Could you imagine treating a patient where there needs to be communication from one doctor to another doctor, maybe a doctor that's within a field treatment site and a doctor that's in a brick and mortar, and being able to have that very secure bidirectional communication right there on scene and sharing patient data. Also, community paramedicine and telemedicine and interoperability with all our partners. And as I mentioned to you, when we respond to a large-scale event, we're talking hundreds of potential responders, and being able to communicate on the same network, being able to share data in a timely way. This is something that we're going towards, leaning towards, and we're looking to FirstNet to be able to help in this affair. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Any questions about the EMS response? No? Okay, we'll come back to it when we get into the questions of the panel. Pat, would you please tell us about LA
Okay, I'd like to address this technology issue in a couple of different aspects. One is situational awareness, and the second one has to do with resource availability and coordination. We've all heard about the Boston Marathon bombing, where the commercial bandwidth was pretty much consumed with their commercial customers sending video and pictures. It was not available to any of the responders that were there to assist those that had been injured or killed. As an example of more locally and very recently, in West Hollywood, each Halloween they have a Halloween parade and party on the boulevard. That's a very well attended function. About 500,000 people in a very, very small area. Verizon and AT&T brought in cell on wheels to be able to support the increased population. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they were measuring 50 to 60 megahertz per second down data transfer speed. By 9 o'clock, it was less than a half of a megabyte. And fortunately, we were able to put out on a beta test a video camera in a Homeland Security vehicle. And when we actually had a man down, they couldn't get any information as to where he was, but the video truck happened to be in close proximity and was able to relay information to the command post to be able to direct the EMS and the ambulances in to help this individual. This coming January 1st, we're going to go green. We're going to go live to support the Rose Parade. Along Colorado Boulevard, there's well over 1 million people, and even though the Verizons and the AT&Ts bring in cell on wheels to support those 1 million or so or more people, that will not support video. Well, the incident commanders would like to know what's going on the boulevard so that they can most effectively deploy their resources. So on January the 1st, we will have 15 cameras live going over band 14 to provide video to the Incident Command Center. That will be in addition to 90 handheld devices that we can actually send video to the field supervisors in the field so that they can appropriately deploy their resources. From a resource allocation, I know those that are involved in CAL FIRE and CHP are very familiar with countywide emergency operations centers and in the incident command system. One of the great advantages in having those EOCs or the incident command system is for deployment of the precious resources. And how do you do that when you don't know who is available or what's available or how to communicate with them and ensure that they get that information? In a fire, CAL FIRE is very used to fighting the fires, but they rely upon CHP to close the roads down. They rely on Caltrans to help keep the roads clear. They rely on transportation to evacuate people, and they rely upon animal control to evacuate livestock. In Los Angeles MTA right now, Metropolitan Transit Authority is looking at putting 2,500 routers on the PSBN system, because when a passenger on the bus gets a little froggy and decides to take on the bus, it would be nice for the responding police or the fire, responders to be able to see what's going on the bus before they put themselves into danger, and to most effectively coordinate their responses. So 2,500 buses with video cameras that the driver can push a button, an emergency button, and be able to stream video back to not only to their command center, but to the responding public safety responders would be extremely important. That and when we need to, if we get a big earthquake and we have a tsunami coming into the South Bay, we can use MTA to evacuate people. So there's a tremendous, great opportunity for local enhancements.
Thank you, Pat. Ferdinand, let's move on.
Caltrans uses a myriad of communication systems, vary by program. The maintenance folks, the folks you see with the orange trucks out on the highways, they primarily use our two-way LMR system. We use an 800 megahertz system statewide. Our survey crews are on 150 meg. We're also part of regional communication systems in San Diego to talk about interoperable communications in San Diego, Sacramento, and we're participating in the East Bay Regional Communication Systems, Alameda and Contra Costa County in Northern California, the San Francisco Bay Area. We also employ satellite communications. We have fixed and portable satellite telephones, 4 mobile satellite trailers that we've worked with OES. We've been mission tasked by OES several times to help with the fires, floods. So that's been a very big advantage, not only for Caltrans, but for the whole state. We also have a complement of amateur radio operators throughout the states, participate in the RACES call-in weekly with the Office of Marine Services. Our traffic operations, we have what's called field elements. They're the cameras, the changeable message signs, the highway advisory radios. So the loops, video detection, vehicle detection, they're connected to our traffic management centers where we're co-located with the highway patrol, with the broadcasters, through fiber optic, wireless, microwave, licensed and unlicensed, leased telephone lines, our own copper. So here's, I think, where I can see FirstNet really have an advantage. So what limits us from installing, or what we call instrumenting more roadway, especially the rural areas, right? Some highways, if you get stuck, you don't see another vehicle for another hour or 2 or 3 or 4, right? An example, and what prevents us from instrumenting is coverage, right? We don't have any coverage there, or if we want to install coverage, it's just cost prohibitive. Last mile is cost prohibitive. To give an example, there was a family discovered, they had gone over the highway, over the guardrail. They've been there for over 24 hours. It was only they were only discovered when maintenance crews passed the highway. They saw damage on the guardrail, so they stopped and they saw the car. If we're able to instrument those areas where we think, hey, through history, hey, we know there's incidents here, there's accidents, maybe we can prevent those or respond quicker and hopefully save lives, right? About 10 years ago, the FCC gave the transportation industry, or the transportation departments, 70 megahertz of bandwidth called dedicated short-range communications. I don't know if some of you have heard that. It's for vehicle-to-vehicle communications, vehicle to infrastructure. If you're getting too close to a vehicle, you'll be warned, hey, slow down, or it will automatically slow you down. Vehicle to infrastructure, if it's a yellow light, it'll tell you, hey, you're not going to make the yellow slow down. So yes, that's been in the works. So we've had the spectrum for 10 years. I'm embarrassed to say that we've done nothing. Well, there's some pilot projects, but to me that's nothing. And now Google has an autonomous vehicle. And we could, I mean, you know, we had this technology, we had this spectrum or bandwidth. And one issue there is what's the backhaul? So we have some fiber, but maybe FirstNet can help with that. Maybe it will further the implementation or make it a lot quicker, expedite. Just what happened in San Bernardino. Our district office, District 8, is about a mile away from there. We were on lockdown, right? How do we notify the employees or essential employees, come in or no, stay home, right? We have a paging system right now. On my BlackBerry, I get pages if there's a traffic accidents, road closures, you know, so FirstNet can help with that. We also have what's called shakecast. When there's an earthquake over 4, I get notified. We're working with Caltech to see if we can do predicting earthquakes. So maybe FirstNet can help with that for coverage issues. And as been said, and I think it's worth repeating, information sharing, collaboration, situational awareness, common operating picture. That's really, I think, what FirstNet really can bring to the table for all the public safety responders. OES is using what? WebEOC. There's EMC COP. So there's a host of internet-based software that we can all share and collaborate information with. Everybody familiar with the emergency support functions, right? So the state of California has similar. It's just called emergency functions. And similar to the feds, EF1 or ESF1, and feds is transportation. And here in California, there is a work group, and Caltrans is the lead for that work group. And part of that work group, part of the core functions is surface transportation, aviation, maritime, railroad, and pipeline. So Caltrans has to coordinate with those particular disciplines with our partner CHP in response to any emergencies. So why is that important? We just did a couple years ago, we did the Cascadia subduction zone exercise, right? And how was response going to be done with that? Well, it was going to be through naval or air bridges, they called, right? So this information sharing, common operate situational awareness is really important. That's why I'm hoping that FirstNet can bring this together for all of us in the public safety communities. Also, for the excess capacity, a couple of governors ago, Governor Schwarzenegger has a broadband executive board to bridge the digital divide, to provide internet access to those areas that don't have any. That's what I'm hoping this excess capacity can do. So we're killing public safety plus giving our constituents or our residents in California access to the internet. Some issues or some items I think consideration. Security has been brought about by Karen and a couple other people. User fees, co-location, governance was one. User priority or preemption is important to us in Caltrans. Since we're not quote the traditional public safety, police, fire, EMS, you know, how will our priority or use of the network be handled? And FirstNet, just the term broadband has an IT connotation, right? In the state of California, there's definite specific guidelines, rules, and regulations on how to implement IT projects. If the implementation will be considered IT, we need to address that right now and get the process done. So when it finally materializes, we have a process on how to implement FirstNet, not start when, okay, FirstNet is here. How are now we're going to deal with it? Is it IT? Is it communication? So we need to start that now. And I think it's worth reiterating, FirstNet is not a voice system. So I ask all of you here who have LMR systems, please tell your decision makers you cannot stop funding LMR systems. We have to keep that going. Interoperability is important. You know, FirstNet is data. In Caltrans and maybe some other disciplines, voice is the culture. So we need that interoperability. And then to Karen, when FirstNet gets going, and I guess OES in general, you're going to have to ramp up your staff. This is going to take all your time. You cannot forget the other projects that the other departments have right now. I want to just say that. So, and I know everybody's busy, everything's important, but yes, we have a lot of other projects other than FirstNet. They're all important. So I just hope that Karen and her staff and OES will be able to get the necessary resources to successfully complete FirstNet and our existing projects. So I think that's all I had for that.
Thank you, Ferdinand. So I'm going to start asking a couple questions, and I would like the audience to ask any questions that they might have tagging on to this. But the first trend that sort of I've come up from the way you guys have been talking about it is around how is technology, or the available and the reliable technology that's available today, how does that change your operational structure? Because it would seem to me that as we go forward, you know, technologies are being adopted by agencies, different things are happening. It's actually changing the way we do things to a certain degree. We're relying on that technology more and more for certain features and functions. So what have you seen in that trend of how adopting a particular technology is changing your operating culture or your SOPs?
I'll start with that one. Let's just pick on something simple for a moment and go back 15 years ago with email. Email at that time wasn't mission critical, but is there anyone in the audience who would say today they couldn't live without their email for a day? Oh,
I would like
okay,
to.
maybe you would. But, think about that. The same comes with texting now is, I look at what I need to do my job, and I need a tablet. I literally work out of my car now. I need a tablet, and I need my cell phone, and it has to be reliable. The way I'm working is as a mobile employee. I could be anywhere, anytime, and it can change at any moment. So for me, I see technology, I talk about it as an enabler in delivering business value in a lot of discussions, but I see it as a requirement for all of our field workers, whether public safety or state employees, local employees, et cetera.
Let me modify that question for Pat, because he was talking about EOC operations and stuff. And there was a day where in the ICS structure, the information, it was bottlenecked coming into the EOC because you couldn't just take that much information. People were writing it down, they have Excel spreadsheets and stuff. Now that's coming in as data and information from the field supporting a situational awareness function that didn't necessarily exist 15 years ago. How has that technology shifted how people operate?
Well, perhaps I'm showing my age, but when I worked a radio car, my radio was in my stretch of communications was as long as the mic cord would go from the dashboard out the window. So to go to a handheld radio was a significant step forward. Now look, and we did all of our reports on paper logs. Today, they're doing reports, they're taking burglary reports in the houses or in the businesses on a tablet. When they're getting back to the vehicle, it's being automatically transmitted to the supervisor for approval and then being filed electronically, in the stations. I know that there was a fire response recently in one of the local towns where where a neighboring town was asked to respond to the second alarm fire. Neither one of the fire trucks made it because they both entered a section on the whistle, the siren. They met in the middle of the intersection and ended up having breakfast in a restaurant with both fire engines in the lobby of the restaurant, and unfortunately also took out a passenger. It would have been great if the fire captain sitting in the right seat could be looking at a screen, knowing what other resources responding with the GPS coordinates and being able to avoid that accident because they could have told the drivers, you need to slow down, we got our partners coming in. Also, think about it from again, from a fire response or from a special weapons team response, a SWAT team response, where you're going into a location where you're able to download from the building department's building floor plans. And so the fire would know that in the northeast corner of the building is where this business stores their chlorine gas. Or, for a special weapons team that knows exactly what the floor plan of the house is, sans some customization that some of the folks do, but at least they would have some kind of a plan as to, what they're going to be looking at. And they're going to save some lives, their own as well as some citizens. So, the technology that's advancing, the information that's available today, from a police response, because you have call history. You get a call of shots fired at 1234 Main Street, and as you're rolling in, you're getting a history of calls in that area of shots fired at 1233 Main Street. Well, guess what? If you pull up and you're facing 1234 Main Street, the shooter is probably at your back.
So as data continues to be collected over time and we start to build this database of where things are and what's happening in a locality or city, it creates new challenges in how we communicate and how do you digest all that information. So one thing I want to ask Craig about that multi-fatality incident with the buses, in the rural area on the highway even, right? I mean, that was a coordinated response, multi-agency, right? CHP, Caltrans, EMS, and if you had information like on the closest hospital, not as a crow flies, but as like how to route through traffic and get people, how would that have changed, the way you guys responded to that particular incident?
Well, I think with current technology and with the type of broadband and dedicated network that we're talking about, it would just help make the whole response more efficient and more timely. As I mentioned earlier, one of the struggles we had was with patient tracking, because a lot of the patient tracking is done with, pencil and paper, the old-fashioned way, because we really don't have a statewide, system that all users, can access and use, where we have real-time data. So we're having to make a lot of phone calls, having to, use a lot of on-scene documentation, to track. It may take hours, where if we had the technology that, available and utilizing it, we can know instantaneously.
So when you're on scene and you're triaging the condition of the patients, you have to decide what hospital to send them to. I mean, is that being done on the fly, or is that just being done because people have it in their heads and they know where the critical care units are, or whatever the hospital facilities are?
Well, patients are being triaged at the scene, and it's being coordinated and determined where they're going to be transported to. And now when it's within a county, it works fairly seamlessly, because, there are electronic systems, there are scanners, the field paramedics in ambulances or in contact with hospitals. It's all a coordinated effort. But it's when we start crossing borders where it gets difficult, because we don't have systems that can communicate. So when we're looking across borders, we have disparate systems, so now we're not communicating, so now we have to resort to old technology, old methods. So what we need is to have this dedicated, broadband network that everyone can be connected to, and we can have systems that can feed off of one another, so that we can have real-time data. Another example is during like the fires, the recent fires, the Butte fire and the Valley fire that we had in California. One thing that current technology allows us to do is to look at, for example, GIS mapping. We're able to look at the direction of the fires and map out all of our healthcare facilities that are in the path and how they're being impacted. And we can see this in real time. So this is the kind of information that we need in the EMS community.
So if they were tracking people on a tablet instead of on the handwritten forms for where they were being sent, what hospitals or where they were being sent to, would have made it easier to figure out where everybody went?
Oh, tons easier. And a big part of that too is being able to pass that information on to those that need to know. We have family members that want to know, where their child is, and being able to have that information readily available. Also for political reasons, there's a lot of pressure that comes down, and being able to provide information right now. If we have that information available, we can provide it.
You were talking about different systems, that's one thing when there are different systems, but on a data network, you can interface systems to talk to each other, right, behind the scenes, and set up that structure, just like we have our mutual aid, structure, with the systems interfacing to other systems, so that there can be continuity of that flow of information. So, that's another possibility that wasn't there before. And I think, I'll give it to the panel and also the community, but it seems like there is FirstNet creating an opportunity not just for interoperability, but for actual integrated operations. Everybody that's on the network should have access to a lot of the apps that are on the network and the data exchanges that are happening and data as a service. But aren't we really talking about like an evolution of to integrated operations instead of just interoperability? What does anybody think about that?
Yes, absolutely.
So we're in a new phase of evolution, and something that we've never seen before, and we've approached it structurally from a command structure through NIMS and ICS and all the way we do our mutual aid and integrate operations, police and fire and EMS and stuff. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, but I think I'm misunderstanding a little bit. FirstNet's the network, right?
Correct.
Okay, so it's not, the applications come later. FirstNet is not developing the applications.
Correct.
Okay, so it's providing the forum for us to have this interoperability, but other vendors and other people will need to participate to make these things happen.
Yes.
Okay.
Because think about it. You have a network where every user on that network is known, right? Every user on that network has its own address on its device that can be discovered, GPS, whatever it is. So they know they're authenticated, they're supposed to be on that network, supposed to be using that network. So with that information, in the way that IT people think, right, is I can connect the dots between all these different systems and everything and connections and routes and make it all talk to each other, right? It's just a, sort of a bureaucratic nightmare to make that happen, but it's possible. And it wasn't possible before. I mean, in the traditional, look at LMR and interoperability. Everybody's been working on that for so long in the regional aspects. In some cases, you go to rural fire departments, and interop is like having 5 radios on in your truck, right? I mean, to pick up the radio for where the area you're in, and on the talk channels. But with the FirstNet coverage and advice, it's unilateral. It's everybody's on the same actual network. So. Opportunity to connect dots where they didn't exist before and in a different way. But it forces a reliance on that network. So it's got to be reliable, it's got to be available. If it's not, nobody's going to use it. So that's a compelling reason we're trying to make it as good of a network as we can by talking to all of you so we can solicit that input and bake it into the plan and the architecture for what's going to happen. Any other questions on what it would take for integrated operations? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm probably speaking out of turn because I don't have any background in this, but it sort of calls into question the need for a new operations structure with regard to emergency response, because the FirstNet system, like you said, transcends the county borders. So if you have, let's say, a multiple injury situation and you have fixed bandwidth at a certain location, you almost need a central command center to make a decision on the network who's going to have the radio access for certain applications. So imagine not just one person needing video conferencing to show an injury or something with a hospital. Imagine 100, and then you also have a fire chief, and you have police, and you only have a fixed amount of bandwidth. So I need to cut off 90 of those video sessions to allow the fire department to talk or stream video. Someone has to make those decisions on the ground and the location and then communicate with some central command center that can make that change in the network.
Some of the, what the technical teams are looking into and PSCR is on how they do command and control locally versus centrally, or how that's going to work. And some aspect of our consultation in 2016 is going to involve getting feedback on what the local agencies think it needs to be. It is an onerous task to manually do that. So there's some automation built into the technology that allows it to make those calculations on the fly for, I would say, most of the cases. And there's different tiers on how the decision-making happens. But it's most similar to how you'd look at an ABS system in a car, right? The computer can make those decisions on when to turn the ABS on faster than we can react to it, right? And it will make 100,000 calculations, a second, or whatever it needs to do to turn on ABS on your car and make your car stop, right? So some of that way of thinking and methodology is built into the automation of that local control, but then there are other elements where it really absolutely has to be prioritized, potentially manually in a certain location. But we don't know where that's going to be or how it's going to work out yet, but it's a subject of part of our consultation task teams and consult with everybody over the course of 2016. Any other thoughts, questions about this particular topic? How about on the panel? Okay, how are we doing on time? We're done. Okay. Well, then thank you, panelists. Thank you, everybody in the audience. That was a great discussion.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Real fast as we're wrapping up, I did want to mention the digital divide has been mentioned a couple of times today, and we are working closely with the Department of Technology as well as CPUC and the California Technology Emerging Fund, I think that's what it's called. Yes, Sonny McPeak's organization, because we're paying attention to what's happening as we're rolling out broadband in rural areas, so we can make sure that we're constantly providing that information over to FirstNet so we can leverage both projects. We're all serving the same people, and so we want to make sure whatever we do will enhance both. And so we are following that. Part of what was talked about that I want people to leave and think about is we've been talking a lot about applications and interoperability. Interoperability can end up being a nightmare if we don't pay attention to the applications and how they're developed. If every jurisdiction, every state agency, every unit within an agency decided to develop their own application thinking this is going to work, we will not have interoperability. So it needs to be looked at a much broader sense as we develop applications. This will be one really good topic for a workshop coming soon, because we all have to be on the same page. It doesn't mean you can't have your own applications. It just means we probably need to also have interoperable applications when there is a mutual aid event. So think about that, because this is not interoperability for radios. This is interoperability for data, completely different playing field. And then command and control, governance at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level is all going to be very important. Again, that will be another workshop coming soon, because we don't know how to figure all that out yet, and we will absolutely need input from the state agencies on how they work with the local cities and the counties. So there is so much work to do in this coming year, figuring out a lot of the issues that were discussed today. So I want to thank you all for coming. There's literature in the back. Please take some, share it. If you have any questions or you need additional copies of anything, please let us know. There's a email address, I think it's on the back of some of the documents back there, I'm getting a yes, that you can just send a request in. We want you to have this information, and we want you to share it. We want the word to get out, because California is a huge state, as you know, and we have so many people to reach. So thank you all for being here, and enjoy your afternoon.